September 18, 1944. The Lorraine Plain, France. In the grey fog of the September dawn, amid the sound of distant tank engines and the first artillery exchanges that the fog has been channeling toward him from the south, General Hasso von Manteuffel is watching the burning wreckage of the opening attack through his binoculars, and what he is seeing does not match what his staff's planning told him he would see. He has been told that the 4th Armored Division is holding the Arracourt sector with 2 combat commands, whose combined tank strength his intelligence has estimated at approximately 60 Sherman tanks, a figure that the aerial and ground reconnaissance available to the 5th Panzer Army's intelligence section has produced from observation of the 4th Armored's positions in the 2 weeks since the division crossed the Moselle, and a reinforcing infantry contingent whose exact strength the reconnaissance has not fully characterized. He has been told that the 111th Panzer Brigade, attacking at dawn with 47 Panthers and a battalion of Panzer Grenadiers in the fog that the September morning has provided as the operational gift that the German attack planners have been hoping for. Fog that grounds the American P-47 Thunderbolts of the XIX Tactical Air Command, whose presence in clear weather makes daylight armored movement in the open Lorraine Plain prohibitively costly for any German formation that cannot reach cover before the Thunderbolts acquire it as a target, will break through the American defensive screen and reach the road junction at Arracourt within the first 2 hours. He has been told by his operations staff, working from the available intelligence and from the standard German armored planning methodology that has been producing accurate operational projections since Poland, that the Sherman is outmatched by the Panther in every relevant technical category: armor, gun, range, protection, and that the engagement between the 111th Panthers and the 4th Armored Shermans will therefore produce the tactical result that the technical comparison predicts. The Panthers will close on the American positions, engage the Shermans at ranges where the Panther's gun is effective and the Sherman's is not, and the superior German vehicle will destroy the inferior American vehicle at a rate that produces the tactical breakthrough before the American reserve can be organized. What he is seeing through his binoculars in the first 3 hours of September 18 is not this. What he is seeing is the 111th Panzer Brigade, a formation that von Manteuffel has personally inspected in the 2 days before the attack began, whose Panther crews he has observed during their preparation briefings, and whose vehicle condition he has assessed as adequate for the mission: burning. Not all of it, but enough of it. 47 Panthers attacked south of Arracourt at first light in the fog. 19 Panthers are on fire, their silhouettes black against the grey fog in the way of burning armored vehicles whose ammunition has cooked off and whose fuel has joined the fire. Tall columns of black-orange smoke visible from 10 kilometers and audible as a continuous bass rumble of secondary explosions that the watching German observation posts have been recording since the engagement began. 28 Panthers are retreating north in the fog, their tracks leaving the specific and identifiable marks of armored vehicles moving faster than their tactical doctrine recommends, which is to say moving as fast as the fog and the ground will allow. The 4th Armored Division's Shermans have done something to the 111th Panzer Brigade that the technical comparison between the tanks did not project as possible in a 3-hour engagement, have destroyed 40% of the brigade's tank strength without the supporting American infantry that the standard German assessment of Sherman effectiveness has projected as necessary for the Americans to compensate for the technical gap. Von Manteuffel is a professional of sufficient quality to understand, watching the fire and the retreat through his binoculars at the forward observation post from which he has been monitoring the battle, that the problem is not the tactical plan. The problem is that his assessment of what a single American armored division could do to a fresh German Panzer Brigade, equipped with new Panthers and commanded by trained officers, was wrong in ways that he will spend the rest of the month discovering. And he has 2 more Panzer Brigades waiting to learn the same lesson. General Hasso von Manteuffel is the finest German armor commander on the Western Front in September 1944. A judgment that is not merely retrospective praise, but the professional assessment of both German and Allied officers who have observed his performance across 4 years of armored combat from the Soviet Union to France. He is compact, energetic, and possessed of the specific and instinctive tactical intelligence that the German military's professional culture identifies as the Fingerspitzengefühl, the fingertip feeling for the battle, the commander's sense of how a tactical situation is developing before the full information picture confirms what the intuition has already suggested, that distinguishes the exceptional armored commander from the merely capable one. He has demonstrated this quality on the Eastern Front under Rommel and under Model, has demonstrated it in France as the commander of the 7th Panzer Division, and has been identified by the German High Command as the officer whose armored command instinct is most likely to produce the offensive result that the Lorraine counterattack requires in the time available. He is also, in September 1944, operating with an intelligence assessment of the American 4th Armored Division that his professional experience, comprehensive, rigorous, and built from the most intensive armored combat training ground that the Second World War has provided, has not prepared him to regard with the skepticism it deserves. The intelligence has described the 4th Armored's combat effectiveness in terms derived from the standard German order of battle analysis methodology: unit strength in vehicles and men, vehicle numbers and type distribution across the combat commands, supply status as assessed from aerial reconnaissance of the supply routes, and from prisoner interrogation reports about ammunition and fuel availability, and morale assessment derived from the impressionistic reports of the forward reconnaissance elements who have been in contact with 4th Armored units in the brief engagements that the past 2 weeks have produced. The methodology is sound. It is the German military intelligence system's most rigorously developed analytical tool, refined over 5 years of operational application across every theater the Wehrmacht has fought in. The assessment is wrong. It is wrong because the standard German order of battle analysis methodology has been calibrated against opponent formations whose combat effectiveness the German military has been able to assess from experience. And the German military's experience with the 4th Armored Division has been limited to the brief contact engagements of the past 2 weeks in Lorraine, contact whose duration and whose tactical character have not provided the German intelligence system with the information it would need to accurately assess the 4th Armored's specific and exceptional combat effectiveness in the exploitation and defensive battle that Arracourt will become. The 4th Armored Division is not an average American armored division. It is the division that has driven further and faster in the August exploitation than any armored formation in the Western theater's history. It is the division whose commander, Major General John Wood, Patton has called the greatest tank commander in the American Army. And it is the division that von Manteuffel's intelligence has assessed as manageable with the forces he is committing on September 18. The 5th Panzer Army that von Manteuffel commands in September 1944 has been assigned the mission of counterattacking the 3rd Army's advance in Lorraine and re-establishing a defensive line west of the Moselle. The mission is ambitious. OKW has provided 3 Panzer Brigades, the 111th, 112th, and 113th, as the counterattack's armored component. Each brigade has been formed in Germany in the summer of 1944 from the replacement training system's output, manned by crews whose training has been completed at the accelerated pace that the replacement emergency requires, and equipped with the new Panther tanks whose technical superiority over the Sherman has been the German planner's primary confidence source for the counterattack's projected success. Von Manteuffel has reviewed the brigade's readiness and has communicated to Army Group G and OKW his assessment that the brigades are adequate for the mission despite their limited training, their unfamiliarity with the Lorraine terrain, and their lack of the operational experience that sustained combat in a specific theater produces in the crews who accumulate it. His assessment of the counterattack's achievability has been shaped by his confidence in the Panther's technical quality, a confidence built from the Panther's documented performance against Soviet armor on the Eastern Front, whose exchange ratios in the armored engagements of 1943 and 1944 have established the Panther as the most effective single tank in the German order of battle, and by his intelligence section's assessment of the American armored force in the Arracourt sector as a formation whose strength and whose operational wear from the August exploitation make it manageable by fresh Panzer Brigades with superior equipment. The American forces' vehicle numbers have been reduced by the exploitation's mechanical casualties, the intelligence says. The American supply lines are stretched, the intelligence says. The American crews are tired, the intelligence says. Each of these assessments is partly correct, as a description of the 4th Armored's physical condition. None of them is accurate, as a prediction of the 4th Armored's combat performance in the specific and demanding defensive engagement that Arracourt will produce. Both confident sources are wrong in ways that the September 18 battle is about to demonstrate, with a finality that von Manteuffel's professional honesty will eventually acknowledge in his post-war analysis. An analysis whose specific and documented candor about his underestimation of the 4th Armored Division represents one of the most revealing German professional assessments of American military quality in the entire European campaign. The 4th Armored Division that von Manteuffel's 3 Panzer Brigades are going to attack in the 11 days between September 18 and September 29 is a division whose combat effectiveness the German intelligence has comprehensively misassessed in the specific and consequential way that intelligence misassessments affect military outcomes. Major General John Wood has been driving his division since August 1 at a pace from Avranches east through Brittany's skirmishes, northeast across the Loire, east through the Seine bridgehead area, and east again across the French interior to the Moselle, whose cumulative effect on the division's combat capability, the German Order of Battle Assessment, has evaluated as physical degradation. More vehicles in maintenance, more men tired, more equipment worn than the same division would present at the beginning of its operational commitment. The evaluation is accurate as far as it goes. What the evaluation does not capture, what the order of battle methodology's inputs and outputs do not have a column for, is the specific and irreplaceable enrichment of tactical proficiency that sustained successful combat produces in units whose performance has been rewarded by operational success, and whose training has been continuously supplemented by the specific and hard-won knowledge that 8 weeks of winning battles creates in the commanders and crews who have been winning them. A division at the end of 8 weeks of successful combat is not a division whose fighting capacity has been degraded by those 8 weeks, in the way that a vehicle that has been driven hard for 8 weeks has been degraded by its mileage. Not in the way that the German Order of Battle Assessment's vehicle inventory and supply status metrics describe. A division is not a machine. It is a community of human beings who have been learning, together, what it takes to win against this opponent in this terrain, and the learning process produces increasing capability at the same time that the physical process produces increasing wear. Combat Command A under Brigadier General Herbert Ernest and Combat Command B under Brigadier General William Roberts are not the commands that activated in 1942 and trained in England and landed in France in 1944 with the theoretical knowledge of armored doctrine and the practical inexperience of formations that have practiced the doctrine in maneuvers but have not yet verified it against an opponent who is simultaneously trying to kill them. They are formations whose 37th and 8th Tank Battalions and whose 10th and 51st Armored Infantry Battalions contain men who have fought from Avranches to the Seine to the Moselle, men who have crossed rivers under fire and driven through the night and maintained their vehicles in the field and lost friends in burning Shermans and learned from the losing what the training could not fully teach, and who have accumulated in that fighting the specific and operationally critical knowledge of how to position Shermans behind terrain features that negate the Panther's range advantage by closing the engagement range to where the Sherman's gun is effective, how to coordinate with the 94th and 66th Armored Field Artillery Battalions, whose fire can suppress the Panzer Grenadiers that effective tank attacks require for their security, and how to use the radio network that connects the battalion commanders to the company commanders, to the platoon leaders, in the real-time way that the exploitation's communications culture has been building into the division's operational practice for 8 weeks. Von Manteuffel's intelligence has assessed the 4th Armored's vehicle strength and its supply status. It has not assessed its 8 weeks of learning. It cannot assess the 8 weeks of learning because the standard order of battle analysis methodology has no column for what a formation has learned in 8 weeks of successful exploitation combat against a disorganized enemy. No row for the tactical proficiency that the specific knowledge of how to fight in the Lorraine Plains-specific terrain produces in the commanders who have been doing it. September 19, 1944. The 112th Panzer Brigade attacks the 4th Armored's positions south of Arracourt in the second dawn fog of the campaign, repeating the tactical approach that the 111th's attack has established as the available option in conditions where Allied air superiority makes daylight approach movement prohibitively costly. The 112th has 45 Panthers and is commanded with the aggressive confidence of a brigade whose crews have been told that the previous day's losses have been the product of an unfortunate tactical situation and that the Panthers' technical superiority will assert itself in the coming engagement. The 37th Tank Battalion, under Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams, the officer whose aggressive command presence and whose specific and practiced knowledge of how to use terrain in armored combat has made him the de facto forward combat leader of Combat Command A's most demanding engagements since Avranches in August, and whose name will eventually be given to the M1 Abrams tank that the American Army builds for the next generation in the specific and documented honor of the officer whose September 1944 performance at Arracourt in the Lorraine Plain represents the most sustained example of successful defensive armored leadership against a numerically and technically competitive opponent in the entire Western Theater, is holding the sector that the 112th is attacking. Abrams has positioned his Shermans in the hull-down positions behind the Lorraine Plains' shallow ridgelines, and in the draws whose folds provide the lateral concealment that the German attack's frontal approach cannot observe before the range has closed to less than 500 meters. He has spent 2 days in these positions. He knows where the Panthers will appear. He knows the ranges. He has walked the terrain himself in the manner of a battalion commander, who understands that the difference between a good hull-down position and an inadequate one is the specific 3 meters of elevation that a personal terrain walk identifies, and that a map analysis misses. The German doctrine has established 500 meters as the range at which the Panther begins to achieve decisive tactical advantage over the Sherman. The range at which the Panther's long 75mm gun can defeat Sherman frontal armor at angles and velocities that the Sherman's own 75mm or 76mm gun cannot reciprocate with consistent effectiveness from the front, making the Panther versus Sherman engagement a matter of whether the Panther can close to 500 meters before the Sherman can find a flanking angle, or a hull-down position, that changes the engagement geometry. Abrams's Shermans are waiting until the Panthers close to ranges where the Panther's advantage at long range has been negated by the fog that reduces visibility to less than 500 meters, and by the terrain's specific character in this sector, which converts the 112th's approach into a channeled movement along the ridgeline's forward slope, whose direction Abrams's observation posts have been tracking since the fog began to thin at 0800. At 700 meters in the thinning fog, the first Sherman fires from the ridge's reverse slope, a hull-down position whose frontal exposure to the approaching German formation is approximately 2 meters of turret and gun, against which the Panthers must fire accurately to kill, while the Sherman's target is the full silhouette of a Panther moving across a flat field. The Panther's crew cannot locate the origin of the fire in the fog because the origin is behind a ridgeline whose topographic signature is indistinguishable from the surrounding terrain at this range and in this visibility. More Shermans fire. The muzzle flashes are invisible from the German side of the ridge. The Panthers are in the open, crossing the flat ground between the tree line they have used for approach cover and the ridge line where Abrams has positioned his battalion. They are exactly where Abrams positioned them to be. The engagement at Arracourt on September 19 is not the technical comparison between Panther and Sherman that von Manteuffel's planning has assumed it would be, is not the long-range duel between superior German optics and armament against inferior American equivalents that the specification comparison projects as the engagement's primary determining factor. It is the tactical comparison between experienced crews in good hull-down positions on terrain they have been occupying for 2 days, and inexperienced crews in the open on terrain they have crossed for the first time this morning. And the tactical comparison produces results that von Manteuffel's technical assessment did not project. By midday on September 19th, the 112th Panzer Brigade has lost 23 Panthers destroyed or disabled and is withdrawing east through the fog that is now protecting the German retreat with the same impartiality with which it protected the German attack. The near failure in the 4th Armored's 11-day defensive engagement at Arracourt, the moment when von Manteuffel's attacks come closest to achieving the breakthrough that the operational plan requires, and that the German High Command has been waiting for as the signal that the Lorraine counterattack's operational logic has been validated, arrives not in the opening days when the 111th and 112th Brigades' losses are at their most concentrated, but on September 25, when the 113th Panzer Brigade, having learned from the preceding week's engagements something about how the 4th Armored positions its defensive line, makes its most determined and most operationally intelligent attack of the campaign against the junction of combat commands A and B in the sector north of Arracourt. The attack has been planned with the specific and operational intelligence that the preceding week's engagements have provided about the 4th Armored's defensive positions. Intelligence that has identified the seam between the two combat commands as the most likely exploitation avenue, because seams between adjacent formations are the defensive vulnerability that German armored doctrine identifies as the primary target for exploitation in any defensive line whose width exceeds the defending force's ability to provide comprehensive coverage at every point. The 113th commits 35 Panthers and its full Panzer Grenadier Battalion in a coordinated attack whose timing and axis have been developed from the week's observation of American defensive patterns, and whose first 90 minutes produced the penetration that the 111th and 112th failed to achieve. German armor within 2,000 meters of the Arracourt Road junction, whose capture is the attack's operational objective, and whose capture would force the 4th Armored to reorient its defense and potentially create the operational opening that the entire Lorraine counterattack has been designed to exploit. General Ernest, commanding Combat Command A from his forward command post, whose location he has maintained close enough to the fighting line to make this kind of rapid response decision possible, directs the reserve tank company, whose existence in his command structure he has maintained specifically against the contingency of exactly this kind of seam penetration, to move to the gap and establish a blocking position. The reserve company is 8 Shermans. 8 Shermans against 35 Panthers is not the engagement that Armored Doctrine's force ratio analysis would recommend. The 8 Shermans move to the gap anyway, because the gap must be closed, and 8 Shermans are what the gap has available. The 8 Shermans take a position behind a farm complex, whose stone buildings provide frontal cover and whose surrounding orchard, the apple orchard, that the Lorraine Plains agricultural tradition has established behind every farmhouse in this region, full-leafed in September, and dense enough to provide the concealment that the Sherman's profile requires to disappear from the 113th's observation, provides the lateral concealment that the reserve company's leader has identified as the position's defensive advantage in the 40 seconds between receiving his order and beginning his movement to the gap. He has been in Lorraine for 3 weeks. He has learned the terrain the way that the 4th Armored soldiers have been learning it, by fighting in it, daily, at the pace of an exploitation, and then at the pace of a defensive engagement, whose specific character has been teaching lessons about the relationship between the Lorraine Plains topography and the tactical situations it creates. He knows what an apple orchard at 800 meters looks like to a German Panther crew looking for a target, and he knows that it looks like nothing, and he puts his 8 Shermans inside it. The 113th's Panthers close to 800 meters, moving through the field in the tactical confidence of a formation that has identified the gap and whose objective, the road junction 2,000 meters further north, is visible on the map as the achievement that the penetration makes available. The 8 Shermans opened fire from the orchard's cover simultaneously, the first salvos landing within a 4-second window, whose simultaneity is the product of the reserve company leader's fire control, which he has given as a single order, rather than the sequential engagement that would allow the Panthers to identify the firing position between rounds. The exchange produces 4 Panther kills and 1 Sherman loss in the first 10 minutes. The 113th's advance stalls on the farm complex. Stalls because the Panthers cannot locate the firing positions with sufficient accuracy to suppress them, and because advancing past a firing position that has not been suppressed is the armored equivalent of driving into a confirmed ambush. The gap holds through the 10 minutes and then the 30 minutes that the reserve company's fire produces the outcome that earnest decision has staked on. The 8 Shermans hold because the orchard holds them and the position holds the line, and the Panthers cannot find the firing positions and cannot advance past them. The 4th Armored's defensive line holds for 30 more minutes until Ernest can redirect a tank platoon from his right flank, whose situation he has assessed as the most sustainable position to temporarily weaken in exchange for the reinforcement the gap requires. To reinforce the gap, and in those 30 minutes the 8 Shermans in the apple orchard hold the seam against a force whose numerical superiority should, by any standard force ratio calculation, produce a different outcome. They hold because their position's cover has converted the tactical situation from a force ratio problem, which favors the 113th by more than 4-1, into a terrain problem, which asks whether the 113th can advance past a firing position it cannot locate and suppress. And the terrain problem's solution is a tank kill at 800 meters, and at 800 meters with concealment, the Sherman's 76mm gun is adequate for the task that the situation has set. Von Manteuffel's near success at the seam has been defeated not by superior American numbers. The 4th Armored has never had superior numbers in the Arracourt engagement, but by superior American positioning, by the specific and practiced knowledge of an armored division that has learned in 8 weeks of exploitation and 10 days of defensive fighting how to use the terrain it is fighting in more effectively than the opponent that is attacking it. The Battle of Arracourt ends on September 29, when von Manteuffel's attacks have exhausted the 3 Panzer Brigades' offensive capacity. Exhausted it not through the single decisive defeat that the German counterattacks planning had projected as the engagement's likely character, but through the accumulated attrition of 11 days of fighting, in which each of the 3 brigades has been committed in turn against a defensive line that has absorbed each attack, destroyed a significant proportion of the attacking force, and remained intact for the next attack. The German 5th Panzer Army reverts to defensive operations in the Lorraine sector on September 29, with the 3 Panzer Brigades reduced from their combined initial strength of 137 Panthers to a combined effective strength of approximately 51 vehicles, whose operational capability is further reduced by the maintenance backlogs that 11 days of intensive combat have produced. The final accounting of the 11-day battle is the accounting that von Manteuffel's post-war analysis will spend the most time with, because the numbers are the numbers that produce the professional acknowledgement, whose honest specificity is the most revealing available German assessment of what the 4th Armored Division was. The 3 Panzer Brigades have lost approximately 86 tanks, destroyed or disabled, against the 4th Armored Division's approximately 25 tank losses. The 4th Armored has engaged 3 German Panzer Brigades with a combined initial strength of approximately 137 Panthers and has destroyed or disabled 63% of them in 11 days of fighting. The exchange ratio is approximately 3.4 Panthers killed for each Sherman lost. Von Manteuffel's intelligence had projected an engagement between fresh Panthers with superior technical characteristics and a worn Sherman division whose 8-week exploitation had reduced its combat effectiveness, as measured in vehicle numbers and supply status, as producing a German technical and numerical advantage of approximately 2 Panthers killed for each Sherman the 4th Armored could destroy. The engagement produced an American advantage of 3.4-1 in the opposite direction. The gap between the projection and the outcome, the distance between 2-1 German and 3.4-1 American, is the measure of the intelligence failure whose components von Manteuffel has been identifying and documenting in the post-battle analysis that his professional character requires him to conduct, with the honesty that false optimism would deny, the analysis that must, to be useful, describe what went wrong as specifically and as uncomfortably as the available evidence allows. The post-battle analysis is the document that the Foreign Military Studies program eventually extracts from von Manteuffel. In the post-war interviews, whose value as primary source material about the Lorraine campaign's dynamics is precisely this, that von Manteuffel is willing to say what his intelligence missed, and why. The technical underestimation, the Sherman's technical inferiority to the Panther, has been real and documented in every specification comparison the German analysis has produced, and it has not been the decisive factor at Arracourt, because the 4th Armored's crews have been fighting in ways that negate the technical comparison as the primary engagement determinant, ways that use terrain, timing, position, and coordination to compress the engagement ranges to where the Sherman's gun is effective, and to deny the Panther the open ground, long-range engagement where its technical superiority is decisive. The 4th Armored did not defeat the Panzer Brigades by matching the Panther technically. It defeated them by refusing to fight the technical fight. The experiential underestimation, the 4th Armored's 8 weeks of continuous successful combat from August 1 to September 18, have produced in its commanders and crews a tactical proficiency, a specific, practical, terrain-applied knowledge of how to fight a defensive engagement in the Lorraine Plain, whose operational expression at Arracourt has not been derivable from the order of battle assessment that the German intelligence methodology has applied to the division. The order of battle methodology can count vehicles and assess supply. It cannot count the number of times Lieutenant Colonel Abrams has chosen the right hull-down position in 8 weeks of combat, or the number of times Ernest's reserve has been placed correctly, or the number of times the 94th Armored Field Artillery has placed its fire on the right target at the right moment. These are not counted in any order of battle column. They are the sum of 8 weeks of combat decisions whose product is the tactical proficiency that the standard German intelligence methodology has no mechanism for measuring. The human underestimation, the projection that fresh German Panzer Brigades with new Panthers would overcome worn American Shermans in the force ratio that the numbers established, has not accounted for the human quality that the wearing process of 8 weeks of successful combat has built into the American crews, the quality that is not measurable in any specification table and that is not derivable from any order of battle assessment, whose inputs are vehicle numbers and supply levels. The German Panzer Brigade crews who attacked at Arracourt were not inferior human beings. They were men who had been trained to the standard that the German military's training system can produce in 6 to 8 weeks, and who were willing to do what their orders and their duty required. But they were 6 to 8 weeks into the only teacher whose lessons are permanently retained: combat. The 4th Armored's crews were 8 weeks further into the same curriculum, from August 1's first action through the Seine and the Moselle and the first days at Arracourt, and the 11 days of Arracourt itself, and the specific and cumulative knowledge that all of this combat had been building in the men who survived each engagement and who applied what they had learned in the next. Von Manteuffel understood, in his post-war analysis, the gap that this created between his intelligence projection and the battle's outcome. What von Manteuffel underestimated was not a Sherman tank. It was the man inside it, 8 weeks past his first battle, and 8 weeks more dangerous for every one of them, carrying in his head and in his hands a knowledge of how to fight and survive in the Lorraine Plain's specific terrain that no German specification table and no German intelligence methodology had found a way to measure, because the knowledge had been built by the war itself, and the war had not been teaching both sides at the same pace.